Hey, how's it going? Champagne Sharks, how's everyone doing? So we have with us Amanda Yee, and you've had an interesting like 2 years or so, man, because what was it that actually got you kind of blown up? Because I feel
Oh
like I
yeah,
knew you when you had like very few followers, and then compared to what
yeah.
you have now.
Oh yeah, my account blew up within the past year or so. But yeah, I've had a Twitter account for like several years, but it wasn't until the past year that I started tweeting about China and racism against Chinese people. And it's been like it was sort of building up, you know. There's been like sort of this propaganda war against China, like by the United States for like, I don't know, maybe like the past year and a half, like even before the pandemic started. And so, you know, there was like, it started with like all this like really breathless coverage of the Hong Kong protests. Um, and that didn't really stick with a lot of people in the US, even though, you know, the New York Times and the Washington Post, they just like, it was just like wall to wall coverage, but not a lot of people here took interest in that. And then uh, the pandemic happened about a year ago. And so,
I feel
like,
like even before the pandemic, you were getting a lot of attention. Like, weren't you on RT or something like that? I forgot what it was you were on, but it was
it was on
something.
Al Jazeera like about a year ago, but that was like right when the pandemic started. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 And there's just been like a lot, you can sort of see like the evolution of the anti-China coverage like throughout the pandemic, you know. Because like when it first emerged, a lot of the racism was kind of in this way of like a lot of focus on the wet markets and just like a lot of news coverage about like dietary habits of Chinese people, how gross they are, like the gross things they eat, and then just like pictures of like animals hanging in what they call wet markets, but wet market is like a racialized term, right? Because we
Yeah.
have wet markets here, they're just called farmers markets. And so yeah, at first it was like this way of portraying Chinese people as like these barbarians, these like disgusting savages who like eat these wild exotic animals that people in the US would never touch. And it was sort of a way of blaming like the illness and the disease on their own savagery, right? Like they got, and there was a lot of false rumor. COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. And so I think it like, I don't remember. I think it like originated from a bat or something, and then it hopped onto an intermediary host, and then it like hopped onto a human host, and that's how it spread. So in the beginning, there were a lot of false rumors about Chinese people getting it because they ate bat soup, and so there was like um, a picture of a woman on like a travel cooking show eating
Is
bat
that what
soup.
that clip was?
Yeah, do you remember it?
Mhm.
Yeah,
I remember this clip was going around everywhere, and she
yeah, it
was
was everywhere.
eating. Yeah, and the bat had the wings out, and
Yeah.
the bat body was made into the bowl, kind
Mhm.
of for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
soup. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was from several years ago. It was a clip from a show from several years ago, but it wasn't taken that video wasn't taken in China. It was taken in another country. And I don't even know
Oh,
if that
interesting. I
woman was
didn't even know that.
Chinese, but she looked East Asian. And so it was good enough for a lot of people. And so uh, you know, a lot of people like clung on to that. And then, you know, the coverage then sort of evolved into, you know, COVID-19 as a way of undermining the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy, and how like everything that they did to combat it, and like however they reacted to it, was a demonstration of like how authoritarian it was. Like the lockdown was authoritarian. I remember Kenneth Roth, who's the director of Human Rights Watch. He tweeted out about how the lockdown was a violation of human rights, a violation of the human right of freedom of movement.
Uh, just to add some context to something you said a few minutes ago, because I found the information, so I figured let me bring it up before you get too far. Yeah, a lot of the things are actually in Palau. I'm not sure where that
Yes,
is,
yes,
or Indonesia. So a lot of these clips actually weren't in
right.
China.
The
You're right.
bat soup clip was taken in Palau, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. Yeah. And I mean, like Chinese people don't even eat bats, but like even if they did, like who cares? We eat lots of really weird, but quote unquote weird shit here,
Yeah, yeah. That woman might have been Chinese, it says.
Okay.
They found a woman, but she wasn't in China. She was in Palau as a
Mhm.
tourist. And yeah, so like it's agreeing what you're saying, this article, that it's not an
Yeah.
actual Chinese delicacy. She was just being an adventurous tourist, in which case I'm sure you'd probably find a lot of Americans, because there's a lot of Americans who like to do that too, go places and try the craziest thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like the guy Andrew, what's his name?
Oh,
Um,
Andrew Zimmerman.
yeah,
The bar foods. Yeah. Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of white influencers that go foreign countries and try the most exotic thing they can try. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't even know that before you came here. I didn't know it wasn't a Chinese delicacy at all.
Yeah, and I mean, there's like this like already existing stereotype that dates back all the way to the gold rush and like the first wave of Chinese immigration here. The stereotype of Chinese people as like dirty and backward and like living in filth. So the stereotype is very old, and we've known it for a long time. So that's why, those kinds of clips, they have the currency that they do, right? Is because it has that like sort of image of the savage Chinese person like in the back of your mind, and it kind of alludes to that.
Yeah, it's funny too. If you look at things like Fear Factor and other types of things, I mean, and then you look at YouTube influencer sphere, because I watch a lot of travel
Mm-hmm.
videos on YouTube, and you'll see people on YouTube, Americans eating testicles, doing all this
Yeah,
stuff, and nobody, tries to say, "Oh, America's a country full of testicle eaters." It's
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
very interesting. It doesn't take much
There
for that
was
crazy. Yeah,
I used to watch Fear Factor when I was a kid, and the one memory I have of Fear Factor is they had to eat what we call like preserved eggs or 1,000-year-old eggs.
yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly how they're prepared, but I think they're like buried in ash or something. And I think it's a duck egg. But after it's preserved, you crack the egg, and what would be the white is actually like black and gelatinous. And the yolk is this like gray color. And Chinese people use it. A lot of times we'll use it in like rice porridge, congee, and cook it in there, like chop it up and cook it in there. But it's a food that I grew up with and I'm really quite fond of. But I was watching this episode of Fear Factor when I was a kid, and one of the challenges was making all the white people eat this like century-year-old egg, this food that I was like very familiar with. And I watched, and like people were like shoving it into their mouths and like crying and bawling, and like a couple of them threw up, and it was just really
Does it
weird to
taste?
watch because I
Does it
was
taste
like I do it
very?
all
Does
the
it
time.
taste very strong?
Huh?
Does it
No,
taste
the
very
taste
strong to
isn't
people
very
who?
strong at all. It's not very strong at all.
So it's more like a
But I just
psychological thing
think,
for them, you think?
yeah, I just think like the visual is like very off-putting if you're not used
Yeah,
to it. Like seeing an egg that's like black and gelatinous on the outside, and then like kind of like dark gray in the middle. Yeah,
yeah.
you're not used to that. I guess it's like fairly unappetizing.
I try to be very open-minded. I try not to use words like weird for other people's cuisine, things like that. But there is one thing I will judge y'all on, and that's that durian. That thing is,
Oh
and I'm
yeah,
really open-minded. That thing is nasty. I do not get that thing
yeah.
at all.
I've never tried it either.
Oh, you never tried it? Have you
I've
smelled
never
it?
tried it. My dad loves it. Every time we go,
Have you
um,
smelled it?
I've definitely smelled it. Yeah, it looks like
Okay.
custard, and I think it tastes like custard too. But if you cut into it, it literally smells like shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had
Um,
durian ice cream, and I thought it was gonna be one of those things. There's some things that smell like nuts, then you eat them, and you're like,
mhm.
oh, okay. Like Haitian people have this black rice, and the mushrooms you use to make the black rice just smell like shit. And then after you cook it, it's the best tasting rice you ever had in your life. And
Yeah,
so I got this durian ice cream, and I was like, okay, this thing smells like shit, but I'm sure it's gonna, taste okay. No, it just tastes exactly like it smelled. And I had this
really,
big
it like
gallon.
literally tastes like shit.
Oh my! It tastes like sweetened shit. It just tasted really
Oh, that's interesting.
hard to get through. I started getting used to it. Maybe if I kept at it, I mean, better than Vegemite. I could do better than Vegemite for sure. If you ever
Mhm.
had that,
I've
yeah.
never had Vegemite. I've never had Vegemite. Yeah.
Oh, cats reacting to Vegemite is so funny. Someone's saying in the chat. Yeah, but I'm impressed because I always ask people, if you want to come on, if you want something to talk about, and people usually do like one or two things, but you went to town.
Oh,
You had a lot of things you want to talk about. So it
I
makes
wasn't
my life
sure
easier.
how to link. I wasn't sure.
Uh,
What's interesting
you
is that
broke up just now, so I missed the last thing you
oh,
said.
I just said I wasn't sure like how many to link. This is
No,
interesting
I'm
because
happy. It's fine.
I last year I got a lot of invitations to go on podcasts, but this year it's more people inviting me onto their streams,
Oh, that's
their
interesting.
Twitch streams. So I feel like more people are like switching to the Twitch stream from the podcast.
You
Um,
know, I'm guilty because I invited you to the podcast. I literally invited you to the podcast last year and invited you to the stream this year. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I invited you to the podcast and you said maybe later. And then you popped up on the Plan A podcast. I was like, oh God. Like you put me in the waiting list and then you skipped me. I
I
was like,
don't think
okay.
we ever. It's because we never really finalized a date.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's a good excuse.
But you know what?
Yeah.
I like right before the Plan A guys and me, we recorded that podcast. We went out to eat at a restaurant. I think it was like on the Lower East Side or something. And that's one of my last memories of everything being normal. I was like one
Yeah.
of the things that I did before everything shut down.
Ironically, one of my last memories of everything being normal was with those guys too, funnily enough. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it was doing their podcast too. But you are always, how do you have a Google alert or something? How do you always find offensive Chinese news? Because I feel like you have like some kind
Yeah.
of radar.
I
Do people
mean,
just send it to you now because now they know you're going to take it apart? Does that happen?
people send them to me. Sometimes they just pop up when I'm looking at the news, just because the anti-China propaganda is so bad now. And sometimes I just come across them on Twitter. Yeah, there are a lot of bad China takes. So
Someone said both in New York, still horrible connection. What can we do? It is what it is. Uh, so I'm gonna pull up the list of stuff but I think before we even get there, I think we got to set the mood because we were talking last night on last night's stream, and I want to know how you feel about the fact that racism is over. How has it been for you?
Um, yeah, so I try to be like fairly optimistic. But I knew I really couldn't take the inauguration. So I tried to avoid it as best as I could. And I like there's no way I could totally avoid it, Um, but I I think I have like a little I'm very envious of these liberals who are like really happy about Joe Biden like becoming president, because like I wish I could feel that kind of joy and optimism about it.
I feel about liberals the way I feel like when I'm playing with my friend's dog and I just throw them a ball and they can be entertained for like hours. I feel like liberals are like that with any type of resistance stuff. You give them like a anti-Trump tweet and they
Yeah.
just start putting the sassy gifs and the responses. Very
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
like cats with laser pointers, and I envy their ability to be so easily happy all the time over the
Yeah.
most inconsequential symbols.
Yeah. And like, aren't you jealous of that? I
Oh,
wish I could just as easily be, but I don't know.
you sent me this that from Jimmy Kimmel, and
Yeah.
when I looked at the replies, I felt what you were talking about. You were saying something. I'm gonna let you finish what you were saying.
Oh, I was going to say, so I work in publishing, right? And we're working on this, like one book where I think it's a history book, but in one of the meetings over it, like someone mentioned that like one of the editors didn't like um, didn't like the picture of Hitler that was chosen to illustrate like World War III. And they said they didn't like it because in the picture, Hitler looked like a little too like normal, like a little too professional, and not like this like
Was like an anime style
maniacal,
Hitler.
psychotic figure.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's like how liberals look at figures like Hitler, like Trump, as like this sort of aberration from the norm rather than like the most distilled expression of like capitalism or whatever, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's like the whole banality of evil thing, where like the whole
yeah,
point of what Hannah Arendt said was that evil doesn't have to be outwardly grotesque,
yeah.
to work, and they haven't absorbed that lesson. They need it to be a caricature.
And they don't think that fascists could look like them or like be like them or be among them. And that's why when they think of like fascists or Nazis, they point to rednecks who live in Appalachia, or like people like white people who live in the South. But I mean, if you like a lot of the people who rose up within the ranks of the Nazi regime, they were white collar professionals.
Oh yeah,
They were like business executives, advertising,
some small business owners, some
yeah,
medium business owners.
yeah.
So this is the what you sent me, and I'm like, this is a perfect example. Is Jimmy Kimmel, and here's something that I find crazy, and I was talking about this last night. Was I feel like all the Gen X edgy people, all the like there's someone who used to have a really cool indie band. I forget if it was Dead Kennedys or something, who's now just tweeting like liberal NPR mom cringe, and all this stuff. And I get it. These are Gen Xers, they're getting older, they're getting corny. They're suddenly like ridiculously earned, like, people like Sarah Silverman and all these people who I wasn't fans of before, Chelsea Handler. I didn't really like their too edgy for cool humor before, but now they've gone the opposite thing of being insufferably woke. But the weird thing is I feel like the younger mainstream has just gone straight to like dad woke. Like I don't know what has happened, but the younger celebrities are just as corny. And this is a perfect example. You sent this. This is a perfect example of something that I wish I could see this and be amused by it. Like how easy life would be. Like, instead of just seeing this and feeling
Yeah.
cringe. But this is Jimmy Kimmel. He tweeted, and that's that. And I just can't believe he's gotten this corny. But here we go. Let me know if there's sound. I mean, I'm sure we get a copyright strike for this, but so be it. Also, it's kind of cheap. Like, I feel like YouTubers have better graphics than this.
This is.
And feel free to talk over it, because the more you talk over it, the less chance we have of a copyright strike.
Also, this is probably the worst part of the video.
I'm glad they didn't make Martin Luther King do like a twerk dance or something stereotypically black. I'm surprised they had that much.
Oh no, but they did. They had someone else do a twerk dance later.
Yeah. This looks so bad.
And I mean, who is this for? I like this. I think this like perfectly illustrates how
somebody has a slave owners, by the way.
People trying to reach young people. How old is this song? The song is from the 60s.
Yeah, I know, but the weird thing is, I feel like there's like young. If you look at TikTok and places like that, there are like shit-lipped 20-year-olds. Yeah, it's not like it used to be. Like I feel like, because I'm Gen X, like on the younger side, right? And I feel like 20-somethings were not like this earnestly shit-lipped as what you're seeing now. Like I feel like I see 20-something-year-olds who like binge watch West Wing and stuff like that. It's a weird. I like that they still love George Washington. He was like a slave owner and all that stuff. Like George Washington is celebrated. Why would George Washington be worked up about Trump, a white supremacist being gone?
Right, and I mean, it just kind of it also illustrates how liberals like basically just like everything into a symbol now because MLK, why would he be happy or enthusiastic about Joe Biden becoming president?
He didn't like white liberals, particularly like moderate white liberals.
Right.
Like one of the famous quotes was that he thought they were a bigger problem than even the conservatives because but they make everybody into like a centrist Democrat. I mean, even at the end, even Malcolm X. The only reason they like Malcolm X now is because all his other stuff is acceptable because the moral of the story, the end of the story is that he became basically the way they paint it, like an all lives matter kind of guy. He that's the most important takeaway from Malcolm X was that he mellowed out and said white people weren't so bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you see on Monday all of like the different government agencies celebrating Martin Luther King? The first one I saw was ICE, and then it kept getting worse from there. I saw the ICE one first, and then
I feel like FBI didn't do anything this year, probably because
FBI didn't say anything.
So many people dunked on them last year for shouting out Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day. I think they learned the lesson and didn't say anything.
I feel like the FBI or maybe it was the CIA, they tweeted something on Fred Hampton's birthday or the anniversary of his death or something.
Yeah.
Am I remembering that correctly? I don't know.
I want to know what the social media intern is like. I just picture like some goofy kid in there who's just like, oh, this is a good idea. He doesn't even know history. I think his internship. He's like, oh, this is nice. Yeah. The FBI one was funny because Jabuki, I always forget his last name, but from the Daily Show, he did a tweet where he changed his account to the FBI. He made it look just like it. He put the
I saw that.
Yeah, he put the icon and he put the FBI font and everything. So it looked like it was the FBI tweeting. And then he tweeted, "Just because we killed him doesn't mean that we can't miss him. Happy MLK Day." And then they banned him. They or suspended him for like. That was funny. That's the only thing that Twitter enforces seriously is impersonation. That's one thing they will, like, you can call people all types of names and slurs and whatever, and they'll drag their feet. But if you impersonate an account, I've noticed that they will like jump down your throat.
Yeah, I mean, like, Jabuki has had his account suspended, like, I don't know, at least 10 times for impersonation. Yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty good. You know what I like about him? He keeps deleting his tweets a lot, and the ones he
Yeah,
deletes are his best ones. I don't know why he keeps deleting.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's an account that it's called like Jabuki's deleted tweets or something.
yeah, that's exactly what it's called.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can follow it and you can see all of the tweets that he's deleted.
Yeah, the ones he deletes are better than the ones he leaves up. Like I'm like, you should leave those up, bro.
Yeah, but the ones that he deletes are the ones that will get him suspended.
Ah, it makes sense. I'm worried, like, because I feel like every time Twitter makes some kind of change in the rules or some gesture to get like right wingers, they always end up doing some kind of balancing thing where they delete or ban a wave of like liberals and leftists. So I'm waiting for like Jabuki to get like his final strike, just to balance it out. Like I feel like they always do that at
Yeah.
Twitter, but we have the worst liberals that I think we've ever had in modern history. Like,
oh my gosh, I remember this one.
yeah, I feel like liberals used to when they used to do like their care lord stuff, it wasn't bad. Like if you look at We Are the World and stuff like that, you can still hum that to this day. Michael Jackson's part, was killer and everything and whatever. And I feel like all these things are trying to be like a new We Are the World. I don't know why it doesn't work.
I think it might. I think it just might be us because of Twitter and social media. Everyone's so irony poisoned.
Maybe
that we look at the sincerity and the earnestness behind stuff like these videos, and we think it's really cringe. But back in the 80s, people weren't like that, and they weren't like irony wasn't what it was now. So I don't.
So you think this is the same?
The same way?
Do you think this is the same as We Are the World or Do They Know It's Christmas? Because I'm going to push back and say no. This is objectively worse.
I don't think it's the same, but I think if this was released in the 80s, we wouldn't find it nearly as funny or cringe as we do now. I think like people would actually like it.
I feel like we wouldn't find it as cringe, but well, you know what? Let's see. But this is the new normal, and it's crazy. This is at the convention. The 2016 was pretty bad too. The 2016 stuff when they brought out all those celebrities. Let's see if we can find that one. And this guy's a weirdo. He's so attention hungry.
It's just so over the top.
Yeah. See, the thing that bothers me about him, right? And I feel like he's always trying to paint like the black community as homophobic. So he's always going places and giving things. And instead of talking about, like, even during George Floyd, he comes out and talks about, yeah, this is bad, but we got to stop at the homophobia in the black community. And it's like, most black people I know who don't like him, it's not because he's gay, it's that he's doing a kind of, to me, minstrelsy mixed in with like a gay minstrelsy to entertain white people. And I think that's really why a lot of people don't like him. It's,
Oh yeah, this is 100% for white people.
Yeah. And isn't he supposed to be like a singer or something?
Yeah.
It sounds really bad. I don't know if
this kind of reminds me of the Demi Lovato video you sent, that inauguration video you sent a couple of days ago.
Yeah. We played it last night for people who didn't see it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It has that sort of same like really bad background and like graphic.
See, I feel like it's the talent has something to do with it, because the We Are the World people and those people were super talented, and I felt like if Beyonce tried to pull one of these off with a couple of other talented people, it might work. But
I think it would work with Beyonce.
Yeah, but Beyonce's one of the few people I think that is on that powerhouse level. Like now it would be John Legend and Chrissy Teigen and Macklemore or something. It just
I think Beyonce could make it work. This just feels a little out of touch.
Yeah, it's like here everybody is over the hill or is like a reality star or some kind. It's almost like physical Saturday Night Live skit. Yeah, it's almost like you know what happens? We don't have A-listers anymore. That's part of the problem. Like even our biggest stars, it's not the same. Where, I mean,
Yeah.
everyone's doing like Will Smith is doing TikToks and has a YouTube show. Like it's not that era of I feel like stars used to be like they came down from Mount Olympus. You didn't see them too much. They
Yeah.
came down and did something, and then they were out of the public eye. And tabloids were even different because the tabloids had an actual antagonistic relationship with the stars because the stars were like, hey, we're A-list. We don't need to be seen all the time. Leave us alone. Now, if you're out of sight for like 5 seconds, you're out of mind. So now it's like stars call up TMZ. Hey, I'm coming at the airport. Come intercept me. Then like TMZ rushes them, and it's no more Sean Penn punching the photographer or Bjork clawing the paparazzi's face. Now they're like, hey TMZ, take a walk with me. It's just like,
yeah, we don't have mega celebrities anymore. I feel like we have like TikTok influencers, Instagram influencers, Twitter like micro celebrities,
reality show people who also do all the same social media stuff you talked about. So it's all
people, especially on the left. There's like a lot of celebrity around leftist podcasters, I feel like.
But I don't think the right's different though, because look at all those Dave Rubin. They have like, okay, Ben Shapiro didn't start that way, but he's basically that now. I mean, he's always making news with his tweets. I feel like everything is kind of blended. Like I'm trying to think of some other people like Baked Alaska, and I think the alt-right, I think, really kind of made that for the right wing as well, where it's like being a right-wing Twitter / YouTube guy was, you probably don't really like, I'm a masochist, so I watch a lot of right-wing YouTube and all that stuff.
Do that.
So some of that stuff, and just to keep abreast of what's going on. And those people, honestly, I think are more popular than the leftist ones. They have insane follower counts on YouTube, insane, and it's a better grift because those people will give you money. Like they will, like the Mike Cernoviches of the world and stuff. They can crowdfund the shit out of anything because they have really aggrieved followers.
Yeah. I said podcasters like a few minutes ago. I should have said like Twitch stars. The left has Twitch stars now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and left YouTubers. That's crazy to me that you can like just start a YouTube channel and then like become famous off of that, and people will give you money.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't want to criticize that because you can always give us money. We're not going to complain.
Yeah,
but I think also people are kind of starved for good commentary too. Part of the problem is that I mean, we talk about this sometimes, and this is going to be a good segue into the China stuff. Is I think a lot of people who are sincerely interested in information, like if you were to start a YouTube and you cover a lot of stuff you covered, I think you get a lot of people because people don't want to see Matt Stoller's takes, or if they do see Matt Stoller's takes and they hear someone like you dissect it, they're going to feel stupid. Like, wow, I had no idea this is what's been going on, because I feel like the mainstream legacy media has gotten so dumbed down, and the personalities that they use now are so childish and childlike. Like for example, I'm sure like if you're looking at the replies of that video we just saw, you probably see like Roxanne Gay and 50 other blue checks in there, like, yes, this is great. The Jimmy Kimmel thing. So
yeah.
I think it's not so crazy just because Arando really could do a better job of giving you China information. Like Arando, who gave a damn about being accurate, I think actually could give you better information than the New York Times got
I
right now.
feel like I am always astonished at, like, if you take an anti-China article that was printed in the New York Times, and all those newspapers, they have like a Rolodex of experts and analysts that they like call upon for quotes and stuff, right? They're usually professors, or they'll pull a quote from a think tank, a policy paper, or they'll get a representative of a think tank to quote on that topic that they're writing about. And I am always like astonished at, if you just do like a little bit of research, like who is actually funding that think tank, that is being quoted in that article. But people take it because there are a lot of corporate interests at play. And we'll talk about it later, but a lot of these think tanks that have been quoted in these like really rabid anti-China articles, like so many of them get hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from like weapons contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Atomic. And it's all public information, and it's not just weapons contractors, but it's like Facebook, telecom companies like AT&T, even like governments like Japan. Sometimes the State Department will give them money. And so like people will take these articles at face value. But if you do a little bit of research, like you can't deny like these sorts of corporate interests that are at play. But the problem is that we live in like this sort of attention economy where people don't even read an article anymore. Most people just read the headline and then take it at that. So you can't like really expect someone to like read the headline, click on the link, read the whole article, and then actually Google information on the think tank that's quoted in that article. Like no one's going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of money and ability to research, so it kind of makes you wonder, why did it still keep getting it so wrong? Is it because of pre-existing biases? Is it because they don't even believe this stuff themselves, but they just have an agenda? Like, what would your thoughts be
Are you
about it?
talking about like the think tanks themselves, or
Mhm.
like, well,
All of it, all of it. I
yeah,
mean,
well,
whatever you can shed light on.
thanks. If they write, so think tanks, they sort of became a thing during the Cold War. And what they do is they'll write policy papers and analysis, and then those papers will sort of shape and influence US policy. So if a think tank is getting like tons of money from weapons manufacturers, and then it gets quoted in an article that says something like China has a grand strategy for military domination, then like the weapons contractors will be able to sell weapons. It's all part of the military industrial complex. Yeah, and so it's like
I like this. I like this kind of talk because anything that ties everything in together and sounds like a tinfoil hat is being worn,
I
I'm very,
feel like
I'm
that's
very inclined to believe in it.
when I talk about this stuff.
Yeah, no, this is the right place because we put on the tinfoil koofies a lot, and
No, but
I
it's true
agree with all of
though.
it.
It's true though.
Yeah,
Like there was no way that an executive from Raytheon or Lockheed Martin, a weapons contractor, could be quoted in an article in the New York Times and say like, oh, like China's going to start a world war. China wants to take over the world. China is building like their military. Well, no one would take them seriously. They would be like that guy has a major conflict of interest. He just wants to sell weapons. But so what they do instead is they like launder the information. They launder the corporate, interests. And instead of the Raytheon exec directly saying it, they will give money to the think tank. The think tanks will write a policy paper, which will get quoted in the New York Times, or they will send a representative to talk to a New York Times reporter to give them a quote. So that's how it happens.
Just slightly aside, but I saw an info made a good point. He put this up at the time the Jimmy Kimmel thing was playing, but this is true. Have you ever heard "Ain't Gonna Play Sun City"?
No.
Oh my God, that's a perfect example. It's A-list heavy hitters, and they're all talking about how they're gonna divest from South Africa. I would play it, would get a copyright strike, but a video for it and everything. It's all A-list heavy hitters preaching against South Africa and playing against South Africa. So it's like, I ain't gonna play Sun City, and it's an all-star jam. And that thing, I'm telling you, it would hit today. It would be when we finish, listen to it, and I'm telling you, if they made a song that hit that hard and say did it for BDS or something, even the most irony poisoned people would love that song. Yeah, I just think it's a different era. I just had to say that because I thought that was a good example. But going back to what you were talking about, let's get to some of your favorite examples. And if you want, by the way, I don't know if you ever used this space before, but you see that share screen thing on the bottom? You're free to actually put stuff up on the screen yourself and share stuff if you want, but in the meantime, there was this article about Washington. You want to start with the Wall Street Journal one? I'll let you decide which of the things that you sent you want to start with. This is your show.
The think tank one, because we were just talking about it.
And that's the Wall Street one, right? Or is that a different one?
That was the thread I sent you. Let me find it.
Yeah, I have all of them. So he's got up. So you just got to let me know which one.
Okay, you're in the doc. So it's the one I'm highlighting right now.
Oh, okay, cool. And it's actually your thread, right?
It's my thread, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and tell people where to follow you on Twitter.
Cat Content Only, CATCONTNTONLI.
Was that an ironic title, or at one point actually Cat Content Only?
No, there was no point when I was actually Cat Content Only. That was a name that I chose when I had like maybe 200 followers, and then my account blew up and it was too late to change it.
Okay. So let's see. Yeah, so is it on the screen now? Can you see it?
Yeah, it's on the screen.
Okay, so I'll let you walk us through it. Just tell me what you want me to highlight.
Yeah, maybe just like hit that first post. Yeah, so this is here, let me click on it. So this is an op-ed that was written in hold on, it was written in
the meantime, someone gave you a shout, and to PSL, which I know you're involved in.
Oh, hey. Yeah, so this was written in like a Dallas newspaper or something. It's an op-ed, and it's basically about, I mean, there are like hundreds of them, right? But this is about like China's like grand strategy of like world domination.
Yeah, China's takedown of Hong Kong is part of a strategy of world domination. And you know what's interesting about this stuff is that there's like a super horseshoe thing going on, where it's like one of the few things you see a lot of liberals, a lot of right wingers, and a lot of even leftists and anti-fascist types agree on is that China's always the bad guy, even if they're agreeing on it for different reasons.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I feel like the Hong Kong thing was a perfect example.
The
So
Hong Kong thing is funny because a lot of people say it's like an example of Chinese imperialism, even though like Hong Kong like belongs to China and it was ceded to the British after the first Opium War, and so every time it like tries to assert sovereignty over it, people kind of freak out and
well,
say it's colonizing Hong Kong.
I know one thing with a lot of leftists and stuff I notice is they think of Hong Kongers. That's not a good word. But I already said it. They
I
see
think
them wearing black. They see them with the mask, and there's a lot of online leftists who have a lot of romanticized view of anything that looks black bloc, that looks anti-fascist. So they see protesters. They see
Mhm.
them throwing stuff against cops and fighting stuff against cops, and the optics of it just make them think, oh yeah, this is the little guy fighting the big guy. But a
Mhm.
lot of the politics behind the Hong Kong protesters are often like very racist, hyper
Yeah,
capitalist.
there's like a very where do I start with this? Back to your like first point, I think there is a tendency among people in the US to see a group of protesters uh, protesting against any government and think that it's like automatically progressive. Um, in the case of Hong Kong, so there is a lot of racism against mainland Chinese within Hong Kong. Um,
They were saying
they,
some heinous things against Chinese people on Twitter. I was like shocked when I
yeah,
saw.
yeah. Like they'll often refer to them as locusts because, like Chinese mainland tourists will come like via train from the mainland to Hong Kong, and they'll they go shopping and like they see them as like hordes. So they referred to them as locusts. And there are different like sort of strains within the Hong Kong protest movement. There are like reactionary elements, there are like more pan-democratic liberal elements.
Yeah, and
Um,
someone pointed this out. I remember this. A
oh
bunch of
yeah,
them are
yeah, yeah.
changing their Twitter AVs to Donald Trump.
Yeah, yeah. So what's been interesting about the Hong Kong protests is the way that the media paints them as pro-democracy protesters. Um, but democracy is like kind of one of these like politically vacuous words that like media uses, but it never really defines it, you know.
It, it's
Um,
vacuous, but it's one of those word terms like free speech that people
that we
reflexively
relate to.
get
Yeah,
defensive. Yeah, get
yeah.
defensive over.
Yeah, we relate to it because we see ourselves as a democracy. So we see ourselves in the pro-democracy Hong Kong protesters. But, like Jimmy Lai is a media mogul, like a multi-billionaire media mogul who has, I believe, funded like these protests. And he's like kind of a right winger and has connections to Trump. But I will often see him referred in the news as like pro-democracy media mogul Jimmy Lai. And it's
Mm.
that's a total oxymoron, you know. But anyway, so Claudia Rosette is the writer of this op-ed, and she works for the Hudson Institutes. And so I Googled the Hudson Institute just to see like where their funding came from because I was curious. And if you click on the next screenshot.
Here's the next screenshot. And oh, they have some heavy hitter donors.
Yeah.
So it might look small on people's screen, but I see Lockheed Martin Corporation and Raytheon highlighted among the people who are pretty huge donors.
Yeah. So Lockheed Martin, Raytheon are two weapons contractors, and those were the two I highlighted. But they're actually
Rupert Murdoch's on there.
Huh?
Rupert Murdoch's on there. Under 100,000.
Rupert Murdoch's on there. Charles Schwab, like the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, the Japan Foundation Center for Global Partnership. So what's interesting is
Open Philanthropy Project is on there too, and I can't remember why, but I feel like I've heard something. Oh, that's Soros, I think.
Oh, really? See, a lot of people will set up these like philanthropic organizations just so that they can donate to like these sorts of think tanks and influence policy. But if you look at the $100,000 tier, there are two names. One is Lyndon S. Blue, and the other is Neil J. Blue, and they're brothers. They are like heads or executives of General Atomic, which is like a defense corporation that builds, like, I believe, drones for the CIA. And both of them donated $100,000, like at least $100,000 each.
But to get meta, you were saying before, like, it's crazy how the people make celebrities on people on the left and the right and give them money and everything. But I mean, I think it works in those spaces because information like that you're not really going to get in the mainstream or liberals sphere. To me, it would be weirder if liberals were able to do it because the stuff that's being covered in the liberal, like the only thing a liberal would have to talk about on the internet if they made like a Twitch or something is more dumb videos like the Jimmy Kimmel one, or just bad, horrible takes like what we've been seeing. We're doing a show probably tomorrow or the day after of like the most horrible takes that have been in the liberal media recently, and it's like it would all just be redundant. But this is an example.
Really bad that I've been seeing a lot today are these like white liberal feminists who are they're just like hating on Bernie Sanders because he like looked like a schlub or something sitting by himself at the inauguration, and they're like, this is so disrespectful to women and women of color because it's a historical day for us. And
I hate when they put in women of color
all the time, and he just shows up looking like a schlub.
I hate to put women of color in there because they don't mean it. It's a bunch of white ladies, but they always feel like if you put women of color, we're gonna look like, hey, we're not doing it for us, we're doing it for them. And there's so many things.
And it's always white women who do that. It's always white women.
Yeah, there's so many things women of color like complain about that white women do not care about. But when it's something that they care about, they'll pretend like, I give it, but they do this for so many different things. I'll give one example. There was an editor at Marvel, and this white guy and some other people, they were defending The Last Jedi, and I was complaining about the Rose Tico character, and I said that I think it's kind of a Asian, anti-Asian woman stereotype that is kind of insulting because the white woman Rey is these flowing robes, and she's clearly meant to be like, beautiful, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then they bring out the Asian character, and she's acting like Funko Pop collecting fangirl, and she's got the stupid flips in her hair. And I just feel like they made her look grumpy because I think the girl is prettier than what they made her look when you see her like at a award show and everything. And I was like, okay, so they paired her with the black guy. The black guy is like a bumbling idiot, and the agencies, the dumb hair, and she's geeking out like a fanboy over this guy Finn, where it's like she's been with the Resistance for so long on the ship. Why would she care about somebody who has only done one thing? Period. But
Mhm.
they made her like a fan of the movies because, like, oh, she's Asian, she's gonna act like a fan. It would make no sense. She would be senior to him. He'd be the guy that just helped like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
week ago. So I said, yeah, this is stupid. And then this white guy came and goes, have you talked to an Asian woman before you even said those
God.
things? And I was like, what are you talking about? And then actually editor from Marvel popped in, Heather Antos. Heather Antos came to my mentions, and then she's like, yeah, maybe you should talk to some Asian women before you start saying stuff. This is an important moment for them, and did you get their opinions or see how it feels? I think you're talking, and
What's
was.
really weird
Mhm.
about white liberals is the way that they like sort of essentialize. Because I mean, there's no like monolithic
Yeah,
Asian women view, and I there's no monolithic Asian American woman view, and I don't know, like stuff like that. I know, like that's kind of silly, but it also reminds me of, when the coup was happening in Bolivia,
yeah.
and like all of these academics were kind of trying to intellectualize or trying to intellectualize and nuance what was very obviously a coup. And they were kind of chastising people who were calling it a coup by being like, do you like talk? Have you ever spoken with a Bolivian person? Have
I
you
love
ever?
that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, same thing as I said before, there's no like monolithic Bolivian view. And, like,
But the funny thing is when somebody who is of that race or color says something they don't like, they get like downright racist and nasty. It's the funniest thing. So like, um, so if you're black and you're not supporting, you know, Joe Biden or something, they will come at you. They'll call you things like a hotep. They'll call you all types of
mhm.
things. They go in on like the ADOS people all the time. They don't say, well, hey, well, it's black people. Maybe we should listen. Like, it's like, it really means listen to people of POC that we've mascotted. We've been into mascots. Here's the punchline of my story.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same within the Asian American community too. There's always
Mhm.
like a subsect of people, Asian American people who are like sort of elevated to speak for the entire Asian American community, and they're, kind of liberal and sort of advocate for the status quo. But through their access to, I don't know, like wealth or like their educational background or something, they're always the one that speaks for us. One of them is, I forget like the name of that Vietnamese writer, the Vietnamese novelist. Teen talks about him a lot. But anyway,
Um, is he a younger or is he older Vietnamese
he's
novelist?
not that old. He's probably in his 40s.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the punchline to my story was that while they were doing that to me, an Asian woman came into the mentions, and not only was she an Asian woman, but she was an Asian woman that works in the industry. She's a artist for Marvel Comics. She does these beautiful painted covers for Marvel Comics, which is where one of the editors was from. And so she's not only an Asian woman, but she works in the kind of nerd industry, and she's a comic artist and does all this stuff. She goes, "Oh yeah, I totally agree with him." Me and my friends were actually talking about how we couldn't stand the Rose Tico character, and they were like, "That's about an Asian woman, like acting goofy like this," and
Mhm.
disappeared. The other two didn't say anything. Like after all that talk about you should listen to Asian women, they didn't say, "Oh, thank you, Asian woman. we were wrong. I'm glad you cleared it up. It was like, so they just smoke bombed, and that's how disingenuous they are all the time. I can't stand it. Yeah, I mean, I really love you on that one. But going on to example two, democracies need a united strategy against China.
Yeah.
America first doesn't work against a global opponent. If you can contextualize this one.
Okay. I actually don't remember the specifics of this article, but I mean, it's just like another one of these anti-China articles. I think it was in Newsweek. And it's basically like the guy is saying democracies, but what he's really saying, I mean, that's like code word for like America and Europe, Western
Yeah,
countries, these like
and
civilized
And the
Western
truth
countries.
is, a lot of these Western countries, let's be honest and take it a step further, majoritarian white
Yeah,
countries at the
exactly.
end of the day. Western is a code for that. And democracies is a code for Western, like Europe and
Mhm.
in America. And Western itself is a code for white. And basically, I think a lot of the actual anger against China and some of the things that it does that Americans try to paint as bullying, America does bullying and interference with elections and all types of stuff
Yeah,
all the time to this day,
yeah,
not even in its past, to this day.
yeah,
And what they don't like is they don't like a non-white person doing that to a country. That narcissistic
yeah,
injury that I think a lot of these um, white liberal and conservative hawks have with China. Not so much what they do, but it messes up the natural order of things. Like
mhm,
they're doing a non-white country is doing to us what we're supposed to do to them. And I think in general, especially, there is this weird, I feel like, West chauvinist tradition of obsessing over the masculinity of Asia as
mhm.
a construct. And this, I think, in the white Western mind, feels like an extra escalation to see like our athletes, our countries, or whatever having to kowtow in
Yeah,
their mind to Asia.
yeah, I think that that's a large part of it.
Even having to censor movies for China, I see it pisses them off on YouTube. Like, don't
Yeah,
censor the Avengers for those guys.
I think also, and we can get into this later with some of the other links that I sent, is that a lot of the things that the US accuses China of, it's guilty of itself. So a lot of the accusations that we throw at China, they're just purely projections of stuff that the US government has done in the past or like continues to do. It's like purely deflecting from its own actions, you know. Like in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of news coverage of China hiding information about the virus when it first emerged, or like China silencing whistleblowers when it emerged. But like the US, like Florida, there was a woman in Florida who was arrested. I'm not sure what she did. She had access to like the COVID data as part of her job. And she realized, she like analyzed this data and realized that Florida was covering up the extent of the pandemic. And so she sort of blew the whistle and they arrested her. And this is just like a typical example of, something that people believes, like textbook China thing that China would do that is actually done in the US. But this article, the person who wrote it is the senior vice president at the Center for European Policy Analysis. And the funny thing about all these like think tank names is that they're like really generic sounding and like sort of innocuous sounding. But you look at their donors and it's just, yeah. So if you go to the next screenshot, they get funding from Lockheed Martin and Raytheon again, weapons contractors.
It's always a sign when you see the same names pop up over and over in any, like we've done our deep dives into the activist corporate space and all that. I mean, that's one of the first things I started finding is there's always going to be 2 or 3 names in any of these types of cases, and this one, it seems like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon seem to come up a lot.
Yep. Yeah. I believe like those two are in all of the tweets in this thread that I threaded. But not only that, NATO, U.S. State Department, what else? The National Endowment for Democracy, which is basically this grant that was set up by the CIA during the Reagan administration, when the CIA was like, damn, we can't be like so overt about our operations now. We have to like fund it through this like grant and then like give it this name, like the National Endowment for Democracy. And
it just sounds so good, National Endowment. I mean, it sounds a lot better than the Central Intelligence Agency, or the movement to
and so a lot of
destabilize.
I think like if you're the Hong Kong protesters, they were given National Endowment for Democracy grants. Okay, so this one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I can say after this one, I'm gonna let you be in the driver's seat so you can move at your own speed. I didn't think this one through, but yeah. So I never know when to move on or when you're done talking about a topic. But for this thread, I'll keep doing it, and then I think for the later ones, it's probably easier if you just navigate it. But
I should share my screen for the later ones.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So in this one, you can go to ASPI's website. It'll give you a list of sponsors as well as a breakdown of where funding comes from. 2019 and 2020, they received almost $800,000 from the U.S. State Department and $307,000 from the defense industry. Can you give us some context? Who is ASPI? Apologies if you've mentioned it already.
No, I haven't. ASPI or ASPI, it stands for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, I want to say. But
you're right, by the way. That is what it stands for.
Yeah. They had a really bad piece in Newsweek a few months ago that kind of sort of suggested that this CPC was infiltrating like community and social and Chinese community and social and university groups in the US. And, they were like trying to infiltrate spies through those organizations. And it's really bad because it basically puts a target on Chinese people and like makes people assume that they're automatically like Chinese spies, right? And ASPI is also, it writes a lot about the Uyghur situation in China. And so that situation has sort of been the like humanitarian crisis that the US has been like really pushing for intervention for like the past like year or so. Before Mike Pompeo left the administration a few days ago, he like called what China was doing to the Uyghurs genocide. And so that has like political and international implications because if you call something a genocide, then that grants you justification for like intervention or like punishment in the form of sanctions, right? So ASP, the think tank that has been driving a lot of this stuff, it gets funding from the Embassy of Japan, the Embassy of Israel, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Department of Defense, and I want to say, NATO as well. And I want to say in the next screenshot, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are there as well. So yeah, it's like,
and yep, there we go. As usual. Oh, so they have a real agenda here.
Yeah. These are, they're weapons contractors. So Northrop Grumman is another weapons contractor.
Oh man, have you heard about Northrop Grumman and Marvel?
No.
Oh, check this out. This is pretty interesting. It's good to show because, and I think this is good because one thing that you do a lot is you don't just talk about the. I think what a lot of people don't realize the degree to which pop culture right now is political and propaganda. Even like YA is very political now. Where they're really trying to push these different progressive values, but then there's people trying to push back against the progressive values, and they turn this pop culture into a kind of middle ground, this kind of neoliberal middle ground. But this you got to see. I wasn't prepared for this, so give me a couple of seconds.
Okay.
If you actually keep talking, and I'll pull up the pictures of what I'm talking about because this has to be seen to be believed. But basically, they did a partnership with they did a. See, you know what? I do have it on screen, so here I'll put it up right now, and then we'll go back to this thread. But it's worth interrupting for. I promise.
Okay.
Look at this. They overplay their hand on this one, and there was enough pushback they had to go back. But Marvel cancels its controversial crossover with Northrop Grumman, and they made the NGEN, this Northrop Grumman super team, and you see Captain America and Iron Man and Nick Fury and all these people running to play backup. So in comics, typically a crossover means that two characters from different books will cross over in a single book, or sometimes it's cross company. Like they have DC Marvel crossover. So to hear a Northrop Grumman Marvel to use the word crossover is weird at first because you're like, Northrop Grumman doesn't make comic books. They don't have characters. Who's going to cross over with what? And here's what it is. Marvel created of this kind of fake Fantastic Four. And what I like about them is, look how diverse they are. It looks like they have a white woman, a black man, a Asian woman, and what looks like to be a Latino man to me. Yeah. So they made the face of defense contracting diverse. Imagine the new CIA makeover.
Yeah. So that reminds me. Do you remember when after Joe Biden won the election, and you kept seeing these articles about these people of color that he was considering for these cabinet positions, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, it's like just indicative of like how liberals just like attach themselves to like any sort of symbolism, because if you like looked like deep into the connections they have or who they worked for, they had like very like problematic ties. And so the guy that he eventually selected to head the Pentagon was Lloyd Austin. And they made a big deal about him because he was like the first Black man to head the Pentagon. But he was also on the board of directors at Raytheon, one of these weapons contractors that keep coming up. So there's always like this revolving door between these like weapons contractors and these think tanks and like the Pentagon or like these.
Yeah, and sometimes actual electoral politics. Some of these people go into electoral politics sometimes too, as well. It's a revolving door in every direction, and it's crazy. And then, of course, the private industry. Yeah, the private corporate industry. But yeah, this is interesting. It says, for many readers who spoke out against the comic on social media, the problem was that the comic was part of a partnership between Marvel and a defense contractor, Northrop Grumman. The new team was named after the company. It was the NGEN, the Northrop Grumman Elite Nexus, which is like a mouthful for a superhero team. It's not even catchy. And the comic featured recruitment ads and promotional materials. But while Marvel said that their intention was to promote careers in science and technology, many comic fans were upset by what they saw as a promotion for a company whose multi-billion-dollar business centers on the development and sales of things like missiles, drones, and other military hardware. So this gives me hope, because I feel like nowadays people fall for any type of diversity, but maybe because it was comics. If it was like a TV series and it was representation like that, I feel like a lot of blue checks would have fell in line of all different races to promote it. And I think that's where I like, because you talk about things on the cultural level as well as the political level, but I think right now we're in a place where it's so porous and the interactions are so creepy, like how the intelligence agencies have such a heavy hand in the editorial of what happened in Marvel movies. Like, I think that's a connection that needs to be, talked about more often, that they do tie in a lot.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'm not like a big pop culture person, so I can't speak to like the Marvel movies, but I can't imagine that they're anything but like pure US propaganda. I mean, I remember watching the Rocky movies when I was a kid, and those were like made during the height of the Cold War, and like like if you watch them now, they're ridiculous the way that like they demonize I think there was like, wasn't there like a Russian boxer in one of them? But the way that they demonized him was like crazy.
Oh yeah, but that one, I still love that one. It's just nostalgia. It's because it's so ridiculous that I feel like you can't. And there's a fake Gorbachev in the audience who gets inspired by Rocky. Yeah, it was really, but that was a weird time though. Yeah. So example 4. Yeah. When I say cultural, like you don't really go into like pop culture, but you do talk about like general culture, of how people frame Chinese, just like in like think pieces sometimes, because it's not always this political stuff. Sometimes even just casual think pieces, they say some greasy stuff.
Yeah.
Cold War 2.0 piece by the director of Scowcroft Center at the Atlantic Council. This think tank is not only funded by Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon, so again, like the same names again, and U.S. State Department, Energy Corps, Gulf States, etc., but the CEOs of those companies serve on their advisory board. So that means that the person that wrote this piece is a director of the Scowcroft Center. First off, what is that?
I'm not. I mean, Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, part of the Atlantic Council. I don't know much about it. Just that it's another one of these like think tanks.
Atlantic Council says it's an American Atlanticist. I don't know what that even means. Think tank in the field of international affairs. They always have the most benign, generic
mission statements. They're super benign and innocuous, but the information that they put out is like so hawkish. But yeah, this is, I mean, you can sort of get the gist of the article from the headline, but like another
but
that's coming from the same people.
But let me ask you this. This is what I'm curious about. I mean, I guess it's a question you can't answer, but I feel like we can kind of try to speculate is these things not investigated and divulged as conflicts of interest, really, because it just mentions here this person is deputy director of Scowcroft Center. This person, like for entertainment news, which is not even about anything that changes lives or is important, they will bring up stuff like this person formerly worked for Warner Brothers. When they're like reviewing a movie and stuff, but something actually that affects policy and real life and politics.
Yeah,
they just treat this as like the norm, which I find crazy. If you've ever done, I've been writing.
Similar to, if there was a politician or a political candidate and he was running for something, and you looked into his contribution history, you wouldn't trust him to legislate on like the banking industry or regulate the banking industry or hold them accountable if you saw that, I don't know, like the CEO of JP Morgan gave him like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But I mean, that still happens.
Yeah, exactly. But you're able to write think pieces about policy and have those same type of ties, and no one shrugs the shoulder.
It's very similar to politicians having those kinds of ties to like donors, and you can sort of think of it as these think tanks become these lobbyists for their funders. So yeah, like ASPI becomes a lobbyist for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin.
By the way, people bring up a lot of good stuff in the comments. By the way, if at any point you want to talk about anything in the comments, even if it's like out of left field, by all means, feel free.
Okay.
You can jump in about anything at any time. But going back to this, the usual names. They call it the honor roll. That's interesting. I guess these are the people that donate to them, and the print's pretty small, so people probably can't see it. But it's the usual suspects, and then some.
Let's do one more, and then we can go to another topic.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Any particular example? You just want to go in order? Do you want to jump
just for something different?
What's that? Yeah. North Korea. Okay.
Yeah. So this one is a recent article. I found it a few days ago. And okay. So, I mean, this is about how they think North Korea is.
This is really irresponsible.
Yeah. So, the coverage of North Korea is pretty crazy because there's not really any way you can like verify information because it's like sort of closed off. And so we end up saying just the craziest shit about North Korea because like, people will believe it, first of all, and there's not really any way you can prove that it's false.
You know what's crazy about this? That title is technically true because anything could happen, but they don't say likely. They don't say sources say or likely. They say could be. They could be doing anything. They could be planning a limbo party at like technically they could be doing anything. It's such a weasel language way to phrase it.
Yeah, and a lot of times what they'll hold as proof are satellite images, just like this foolproof like evidence of satellite images. So I think like one of the evidence people point to of the Uyghur like concentration camps are like satellite images of, like the tops of buildings, and they'll call them like concentration camps. But in this one,
Yeah,
they're
that's a crazy one. The satellite stuff. I'm sorry. Go
yeah,
on.
yeah. And so this one, they're sort of accusing North Korea of like planning to test some sort of ballistic missile. And this person that they quoted in this article is from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. And if you go to their funding, once again, it's Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, which I highlighted, but also Airbus.
Does Boeing do military contracting? They seem to be on a lot of these lists as well. I was wondering why Boeing. They must probably airlift supplies, troops, or something. They could have some kind of.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
oh, forget it. They do have military aircraft. I was looking. Yeah, so Boeing does. Boeing has a defensive. There's a part of the website that is the defense section, and it's a defense overview. Oh, they do the F-15, the F-18. Okay, all right. I answered my own question. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Airbus and BAE, which I didn't highlight, but they're also defense companies, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you the reins. I'm letting you share whatever you want to share.
Oh,
Next,
okay.
off the.
All
Don't be
right.
scared.
Oh, yeah, there are just like so many options. I don't know which one to go with. All right, let's maybe switch gears and talk about
And also, I'll take this chance. Don't let what Amanda said scare you from donating. When she said, "I can't believe people donate," show her,
oh no,
show her
everybody's
how
winning.
people donate. Yeah, but yeah, hit the super chat if
I
you're
just
enjoying
meant,
this.
I just meant like I was talking about like Vouch and Shoe on Head. Well, I don't want to talk shit. Never mind.
It's too late now. It's too late now. Yeah. So, yeah, these are all the places you can hit us up. You can hit us up at PayPal here. All goes back to equipment and other good stuff and student loans. Yeah, that's a seamless show. See, it takes time to get the show that seamless. But
Okay.
yeah, by all means, go ahead, keep going.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Just a second.
Yeah. So what's gonna happen is it'll pop up on my end, and I have to be the one to put it on the screen, but you'll be the one controlling it. So yeah, you'll choose.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah. So you have to actually. There's no audio. If there's audio on what you're gonna show, hit the audio.
There's no audio.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Someone said plug the Amazon wish list. Yeah, if you go to @ChampagneSharks, the Twitter account, we have an Amazon wish list of like saying things that we want for. So check that out.
Okay. So this was a tweet that was tweeted out. I cut their name out because I didn't want them to.
Yeah, and this is what I meant when I say that you talk about culture too. I didn't mean like the pop culture, but I meant stuff like this because I feel like in the culture there's a lot of this.
Yeah. So this was part of a like discourse that was happening for a few days in the Asian American community. Being Dad, I don't really know the story behind it. I guess like it was something to do with his daughter and a can opener. Do you remember?
Oh yeah, that guy. Who you wanted something crazy? It's gonna be unpopular thing to say. I thought it was an annoying story the way he took kind of with
Well, the
everything,
thread
but
was
I
like
think it
40
was
minutes long, and I was like, I'm not reading this. But then
yeah, it
everybody
was
was
way too
about
long.
it.
I think that
But
made it sound even worse than it was. You know what I mean? But yeah.
so it says, Being Dad's story will definitely hit Asian American kids differently. Most of us grew up being withheld a meal or two by our parents if we didn't abide or figure out numerous other life responsibilities. My dad survived a literal war in his teens, so his lessons landed with authority. So there was this kind of initiated a discussion among Asian American Twitter about authoritarian parenting. Because I feel like this is
The Tiger Mom stuff.
the Tiger Mom stuff. I feel like among like non-white people, non-white parents, there is like a little bit of a stereotype of like authoritarian parenting as opposed to like white liberal parenting, which is like very affectionate and very expressive and very encouraging.
And it's kind of weird. You can't quite call it non-white. I know what you mean, but for example, Black Americans don't really get that stereotype, and neither do say most Latinos. But a lot of Black immigrants get that same stereotype. Like
Yeah,
African people
I
get it,
think it's
Haitians.
common among like immigrant communities, but it's especially prevalent within Asian communities, especially like East Asian and Chinese. And I think this person who tweeted it was Korean. But the problem with this is that so okay, so there are a lot of things I want to say about this. The first is that a lot so when we grow up with immigrant parents, we sort of come to learn like how love should be expressed and how love is supposed to be expressed. And we go to our white friends' houses and we see their parents interact with them. And it's like an expression of love that's very effusive, that's very encouraging, that there's like a lot of like touching and hugging, whereas a lot of East Asian parents aren't like that. But because we grow up with these like white standards of parenting, we form these ideas that these are the only ways that love can be expressed. And so we oftentimes we come to resent our Chinese parents for not showing us love the way that we saw like white parents do to our friends.
Yeah,
And I think that's really sad because like Chinese East Asian parents are very loving and they are very affectionate, but they show it in different ways that are like culturally different, you know? And a lot of time, like culturally, love is expressed through food. And so, you know, like if you meet up with friends and you haven't seen each other in a long time, you'll go to a restaurant and like order and share and eat a ton of food. Whenever I call my parents and I talk to them, the first thing that they say is, have you eaten yet? And that's their way of like showing affection. Have you eaten yet? Because when they grew up, life was very precarious and they didn't have a lot of food. They didn't have a lot of money. So, you know, like, have you eaten yet? That's, you know, a way of like making sure that you're like taking care of yourself, that you're being taken care of.
I think colonized immigrant places have a lot of similarities that I think is very interesting. But one thing I've noticed is that different colonial places instilled very different things where they went, and it's changed the actual colonized non-white people in them. And for example, I feel like the Spanish really tried to subjugate with religion really hard. The British colonizers really, really pushed education. And then if you notice, every place that's been colonized by the British tends to really, really put emphasis on excelling in those values. I'm still trying to figure out what the French did, because the French they did something that's similar to this fixation on excelling, but they've screwed up people's heads in their own different kind of way. Like, but one thing I've noticed is all like the similarities when I hear the Asian American kids talk. It's very, very similar to a lot of things my cousins and I talk about, you know, as being Haitian American and stuff. And somebody put this on the screen, but it's a little bit different. And what happens is it says there's a stereotype of Black Americans beating their kids, yelling at their children constantly. But that tough love is, you know, usually about not about academics and intellectuals. Like the kind of stereotypes that say like Nigerians or East Indian parents or East Asian parents get is beating you or berating you or doing psychological warfare on you to excel, which is what makes it easier for people to romanticize, like even better because like, and what's her name? What's the name of that woman who wrote Tiger Mom? Because she did what's it called?
Amy Hua.
Amy Hua. She did something. She did something similar with other races where she did. You know about her follow-up book, right?
No, no, I don't think so.
Okay, her follow-up book is very interesting. I gotta find. It's called The Triple Package. She did a follow-up book called The Triple Package, and it's very interesting because what she does is she takes that. It's called The Triple Package: How Three Unlikely Traits Explain the Rise and Fall of Cultural Groups in America. And that same type of Tiger Mom package, I mean, she's realized something very similar to what I'm talking about, as in this is not unique to Asian American immigrants, but there's a lot of other immigrant groups, including non-white immigrant groups, that it's a really creepy book. It's kind of almost race sciencey, but it came out 2014, and she wrote it with her husband, her white Jewish husband. They wrote it together, and it said, according to the preface, the authors find that certain groups do much better in America than others, as measured by various socioeconomic indicators such as income, occupational status, job prestige, test scores, meaning they talk about all test scores, but I think implicitly it's IQ. I'll put it like this: Charles Murray left the book, which is difficult to talk about. In large part, this is because the topic feels racially charged, end quote. Nevertheless, the book tries to attempt to debunk racial stereotypes by focusing on three cultural traits that attribute to success in the United States. It tried to sell itself as a racially progressive book because it's like, hey, look at these multiracial countries that all, you know, do good in America, but it was kind of peddling an almost Moynihan-ish type of, you know, pathology. Like, yeah, they're not as pathologized as other groups. So listen to her three traits. Listen to this. The central argument of the book that various ethnic groups are starkly outperforming the rest in America possess three distinct traits. These virtues are superiority complex, sense of insecurity, and a marked capacity for impulse control. So that's, to me, like creepy stuff. The impulse control goes back to like Moynihan, you know, and race science, that Black people have bad impulse control. So it kind of creates model minorities all across the board. So so the groups end up being Chinese, which is her, Jewish, which is her husband. That's why I brought up that her husband is Jewish, Indian, Iran, Lebanese, Nigerians. And then this is interesting, right? You know, I said that in general, like Latinos don't tend to have this kind of stereotype, but one group of Latinos does tend to have this stereotype conservatives love. Cuban exiles. She didn't say Cubans. Cuban exiles, the ones that.
Did she specifically say Cuban exiles?
Yes, she didn't say Cuban because Cuban exiles, and then to have one Christian in there because if she wants conservatives to like it, she got to have a white Christian, Mormons. So she puts that in there, and basically the better at being assimilationist. The insecurity package means an anxious insecurity, uncertainty about your worth or place in society, a feeling or worry that you or what you've done or what you have is in some fundamental way not good enough. For example, immigrants are prone to insecurity because of social and financial anxiety, the sense of being discriminated against, a perception of danger, a feeling of inadequacy and angst of losing their established social standing and possession. And what's creepy about that, including the impulse control, is in Nigerians are the blacks. They don't have lack of impulse control that the bad blacks have, or same with the Cuban exiles and stuff. The insecurity is a way to be pro-capitalist and anti complaining about discrimination. Like, oh, being discriminated against or having to compete under capitalism actually helps you excel. So if you were to like remove the insecurity either by creating this kumbaya anti-racist world or a more socialistic world, you're actually hurting people. And then all types of nationalism are promoted by superiority complex, like Nigeria. So basically saying Nigerians are better because they think of themselves as better than other blacks. Chinese have a superiority complex against other Asians, so that makes them better. So it's a nefarious project all around. Like the only reason I'm saying that because I want to add that she does more damage than just the Chinese people. Like she's actually she's taking this project on the road and has spread it across all types of immigrant groups.
And yeah, definitely. And she also did a ton of damage with like giving just like
wait, I want to ask this question real quick. Sorry, she didn't say she's only talking about immigrants. She said there's 10 groups in general. It just happened that most of them are immigrants, but that's why Mormons are in there. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, she, this idea of like the tiger mom, and like child abuse as uniquely racialized as like East or as Asian, that existed long before Amy Hua. But then she wrote a book about it and capitalized off of it and made it even worse. But yeah, I don't know. And so like what it ends up happening is that like a lot of like I don't want to deny that there is abuse that happens within like Asian families, because there definitely is, just like abuse happens like within like all types of families. But when it does happen within Asian families, it gets sort of racialized as something unique and specific to Asians. And so what ends up happening is that like a lot of like Asian kids come out and they talk about their abuse. And
I think another thing, sorry, go on.
Just that a lot of people, rather than take it as like an experience that just speaks for that person, they take it as like something that is like common among, that happens like all the time within like Asian families.
Something that I think happens as well, because I identify with some of those complaints that a lot of those Asian American kids have, because myself and my cousins, we used to always complain about that all the time, about like, our parents being embarrassing, or not being as cool as the American parents, not just the European American parents, but like, what I find interesting is they always talk about, versus the European parents, but we were envious of the Black American kids too, because we felt like they didn't get the same type of grief or whatever. But one thing I agree with one of the kids on right? That you interacted with. I think you end up interacting back and forth with him. He was
Was
a seemed to be a pretty
the guy who had the TikTok video?
TikTok. Yeah, TikTok.
Yeah,
TikTok
yeah.
is full of people just spilling their guts on all types of bad race takes. But the one thing I did agree with him on was he said that
We
you
should talk
can't.
about TikTok in like a few minutes, but yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, definitely. Let's definitely talk about TikTok because that's like ground zero for like bad
For
Gen
like
Z race
trauma
takes.
porn, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like self-deprecating, that's like self-hate central. I don't know what it is about that format, but uh he said that you were so intimidated by or embarrassed or scared, of not being able to figure out white supremacy that you acted like you knew everything. I'm paraphrasing what he said, and that is one thing that I will say I still get upset about is that I disagree on everything else. I think they showed love how they could. They food. The same thing with Haitian people is like food. I'm gonna feed you as much as I can. That's how I show I love. Cooking everything. But the one thing I used to when I got older, I realized, oh my God, you had no idea how America works, which is fine. But
Yeah.
why were you such know-it-alls? That's my only. If I had one thing that
Mm-hmm.
the only thing I agreed with him on in the whole rant was that one. It was like the inability to say you actually
Yeah.
know America better than I do. That's the thing I hated.
So so like I interacted with him a lot, and we sort of hashed it out. And I like really shouldn't have posted that video. That was not like a good thing for me to do. But he and I came from his parents and mine came from different situations, and we both kind of we both as adults looked at how we were treated and how like we had to live under white supremacy, and we wished we sort of think about how like maybe our parents shouldn't have immigrated here. Maybe if they had waited a little bit longer. China's like really prosperous now. US is in decline.
Right.
Like would we be happier there? Maybe.
That's so
Um,
interesting because black people have a similar thing now where they're like, was assimilation overrated? Was segregation a good thing? Was integration,
yeah,
um, you
that as
know,
well. Yeah.
oversold to us? So that's crazy that you guys have a similar thing with was immigration a good idea? Would we be better off?
Yeah.
So fascinating.
What's really tough is, and this is where I might like sort of diverge from these TikTok people. What's really tough when you're like first or second in like generation here is that you are completely like cut off from your culture and your history, and you only know it through how you're taught of it in schools, right?
Yeah.
So I only knew of China through the way that my history class taught it, which
But
is
let's add some context in your case because you were in Kentucky, which I'm
I was
assuming.
in Indiana. Yeah, I was in Indiana.
Oh, Indiana. Oh, I thought you spent some. Oh, you spent some time in Kentucky, but you were in Indiana.
I went to school in Kentucky and I lived there for a long time. But
Okay.
I lived
In,
in Indiana until I was 18.
so I
Um,
want to ask you this question for background because um, was there a big Chinese American community in
no,
Indiana? No.
no, it wasn't.
Okay, so in your case, you have to depend extra on the school. 'Cause for some people, like for example myself, there was a sizable Haitian American
Yeah,
community
no, this
where I
wasn't
was.
San Francisco or Chicago. This
Yeah,
was
yeah.
all white Indiana suburb. And in the 70s, this like town was like a hotbed of KKK activity. So that's where I was from.
Okay.
And so it was like a really racist environment, really tough to grow up in, like as
Yeah.
an only child. And so, like your parents want the best for you if they don't have a lot of money and you're their only kid. And so, even though it hurts to see that kid distance themselves from you, you sort of want them to assimilate for their success in the future. And so I was cut off from like my family history, like Chinese history. And so like what I knew of China, I learned through history classes, which was like obviously very pro-US and very anti-communist. And so they presented China as like this like grand dynasty, which ended with the communist revolution. And then Mao killed like, I don't know, like some like stupid made up number, like hundreds of billions of people. And now it's just like this like surveillance dystopian state, right? And so that
I think. Sorry, go on.
oh well, yeah, that's so you like lose this tie to like your homeland, and you also lose your link to language because you pick up more and more English. And so what happens with a lot of like Asian Americans is they grow up and they try to kind of like try to get in touch with their roots through like consumption and consumerism, because that's kind of the only way that we know how. If you're like sort of cut off from your history and cut off from the language. And so like you go on the Facebook group, Subtle Asian Traits, and a lot of, you see like these sorts of things that like people buy to like sort of like get in touch with their like Chinese culture or whatever, like bubble tea
Oh
or
yeah.
yeah,
And that has become like a slur. Like people call them like boba liberals or boba Asians.
liberals. Yeah, they're called boba liberals. And it's like a little bit of a split within like the Asian American community, because like so like they're like the boba liberals who like are very like assimilationist and
Yeah.
liberal, and they sort of see like China as like sort of this like sort of like uncivilized place.
But what it's
Um,
kind of weird because I think they're like blue check black people in that they're both ashamed of where they're from as uncivilized or whatever. But if white people are into any part of their culture, they don't mind claiming and playing up that part. So, for example, bubble tea has a lot of cross appeal. So, like they'll wear the parts of the home culture that
mhm,
gets them any type of cultural cachet among non Asians. Because like for example, when a lot of those blue check black liberals, they were always making fun of hoteps for being pro Africa and dressing up in African attire and all this stuff. And they write articles and think pieces about hoteps, and they would imitate hoteps and everything. Well, what they call hoteps, like Afrocentric black people. But then when Black Panther came out, and it's a Marvel movie, which is the biggest cultural stamp, you suddenly had all these blurs just basically doing what they made fun of hotels for doing, showing up
mhm.
to movie theaters dressed in African gear and
Yeah,
doing all this stuff because now the white people are respecting Africa, even if it's a fake, fictional Africa.
yeah, and it's like very surface level. Like in the case of like the Asian American community, it's always like this identity through consumption. Whereas like there's this other subsect within the Asian American community that thinks, being Chinese or Asian or whatever, what you should really do is like sort of see yourself as part of, these formerly colonized people, who should show solidarity with people in your homeland against US imperialism and US aggression. So that's kind of like the split within the Asian American community.
The reason I brought up the differentiation between the Black American stereotype of hitting their kids and the uh, other stereotype of beating your kids to get good grades or not slip and get below an A or a B is because Bean Dad was specifically giving his daughter a hard time to teach her a so-called intellectual lesson, and I think that's probably what made some people identify with it more, because he was bothering her to figure out how to use a can opener without telling her, and my family used to always do annoying stuff like that to me. Like, I'd be like, what does this word mean? And they're like, why would you do it if you weren't here? And I'm like, just tell me what the damn word means. And I'd have to go to a dictionary and look things up, and like, it was just an annoying thing. They always were trying to teach me a lesson about something intellectual all the time.
Yeah.
So I think that's where, but something else I think hurts a lot of those kids who compare their European friends' parents to themselves is, we don't really see a lot of white people's dirty laundry. A lot of white people hide their dirty laundry, and I feel like a lot of immigrant groups don't, like, they'll embarrass the kids in public, and the kids the same way will air out their parents and all the bad things the parents did to them any way they can. Whereas I feel like white people, like, you'll find out who was molested way after the fact. There's some kind of explosive thing that happens.
But that like instance of abuse that gets exposed to whatever, like, people are never like, oh, like, white families are so abusive. This is like, this is so indicative of like a problem within the white community. But I mean, part of the reason is that like there's an entire industry that like traffics in these kinds of like trauma porn. So
trauma is trendy now, like crazy.
Oh yeah, and it's like, I mean, I think part of it has to do with like an entire generation that was raised on Tumblr and views like trauma as, the lens through which to like analyze everything.
I also think trauma makes people feel like they lived through something. I think people feel like we haven't had a great war. We haven't had a great depression. We haven't had some kind of generation defining character builder. We don't have initiation rituals like, that people used to have. And I think unconsciously, this generation has created trauma as their initiation ritual, or something that shows I've lived through some shit. I haven't been through a great war. I haven't been through a great depression. I haven't crossed an ocean to escape hardship or persecution, but I had a traumatic life. That's my character builder.
Yeah. And
you can keep talking. I have to get a plug. Sorry. But keep talking. I'll be back in a minute.
I think there's a lot of interest in it too, especially if you're an immigrant, because there are like entire industries, that just eat up like immigrant, like first generation trauma porn. Like, you look at like the people, like the writers of color, the poets of color that get published. It's like we have a joke about it. Like, we make jokes about like Asian poets writing about like mango poetry.
The second person to use that term with me today. What does that mean?
There's like it's like sort of a joke among the Asian American community. Do you know that poet? I don't know how to pronounce her name. Rupi Kaur.
Rupi Kaur.
Yeah.
Kaur, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So she writes a lot about She writes a lot like in terms of that like sort of like trauma porn, but it's a way of sort of reducing identity to, you know, like food or like a mango, for instance. Like a lot of these poets will write, uh, like their poetry will include um, a lot of like references to food. Like if they're like Indian or something, like they'll write about biryani. Or is that how you pronounce it, biryani?
Biryani is the way
Biryani.
I'm pronounced it, but I'm not an
Um,
expert.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Or just like how hard it was growing up with like strict parents. These are all sort of like very common themes within like that style of writing.
Yeah,
Or like,
I think you guys have something interesting going on, which is that Black immigrants have a native group of Americans um, to assimilate into besides white people. So it's like um, I feel like Asian people don't really have that the same, except for in some places like San Francisco, where you'll actually find multi-generational Asian families who've been here for a long time. So it's like you don't have to just be defined by being an immigrant, by being a Black American. If you grow up here, you've got an American accent,
mhm,
and you grew up in American culture, and it's not even like putting on an act. You really just start believing that you're American. It's weird. You almost forget sometimes that your family didn't go back. It's crazy to say, but um, you can forget sometimes. But I feel like Asian people in America can't ever forget, because most of the time only one or two generations out of immigration, and there's not like anything else to mistake them for. Like there's not like a large population of Asian people who've been here multi-generationally who are considered
mhm,
almost a different group. So it's interesting with the media and the poetry and stuff, for example. I noticed, and I was complaining about this. I was like, why is there not any, why don't any first or second generation Black immigrants ever really do any art about being the children of immigrants or the culture clash? They just do art about how, about the similarities. Like, for example, if you look at Insecure,
mhm,
she never talks about her African family or anything, the character. Like, um, the people of immigrant descent who are Black always play a lot of times Black Americans or whatever, or if they even do play someone of immigrant descent, they never talk really about it. So in the movie Dope, for example, the kid, I think, was the main character is Nigerian descent, but he just basically acts like a Black American, and they background the immigrant side of them in
mhm,
a way that I feel like Asian people can't. They just kind of present themselves superficially, for better or worse, like
mhm,
Black Americans. And I was complaining about, yeah, I wish, for example, it's just showing us as like indistinguishable from Black Americans. Why doesn't like a second generation Black immigrant descended writer talk about a personal story, not just ape the Black American story, but show like, because maybe
mhm.
people be interested in that. People might want to hear about the story. And then Teen from Plan A said something interesting. He said Asian people have the opposite complaint about their media. They can't escape those culture clash, trapped between two culture
Yeah,
stories.
I was
Yeah.
about to bring that up. A lot of Asian American produced literature has to do has this common theme of like feeling that you're like trapped between two cultures, that you're like in this liminal space between like your Asian or Chinese identity and like white America. Um, yeah, and those are the kinds of stories that get published. Um, and it's very common, and I've done it too, you know, when I was a college student. Like those are the types of stories that like people deciding like who on scholarship boards who to grant scholarships to. They love hearing those types of stories. And so you kind of learn to frame your own experiences within that type of like framing because it works, it's successful. And that's what you do. And then like everyone else starts doing it too. And then you have like all of these stories that are basically the same.
Hey, I want to introduce Vita, one of our co-hosts. Hey, glad you're able to make it. I thought it'd be too early for you, so that's why I didn't
I
even.
actually left work a little bit early today. So
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, yeah. Someone put this. I call it ADOS cosplay, but that's a misconception. Like some people do. Like for example, Lovey, for example, is very much doing an ADOS cosplay. Like she's Nigerian. She came here and she is from a good family in Nigeria, and she comes here and she puts on this fake forced slang and woo child and all this stuff that's comically exaggerated, but she's very grounded in the Nigerian community and stuff like that. And then people think everybody's like that, but for a lot of people, it's not cosplay. They just don't have any connection to the home culture. Like they really are just that Americanized. They grew up very Americanized. Like I can barely speak Creole. It's horrible. I've barely been to the country. Like it's not like I'm going out there cosplaying. I'm raised American. Basically, that's basically it. It's, like my knowledge of a lot of the stuff about 80s is very kind of superficial with the food and things like that, and they can understand the language. But so I think that's something that people don't realize, that there's a spectrum. There's some people who are totally playing it up and playing a role, and there's some people who they were born in this country. They where they live might not even have had a sub community. Like for example, you're saying where you were from in Indiana, there wasn't a large Asian American community. Whereas some people have, for example, an alternate school or alternate system, where they're being trained in their home culture. Like I had some friends, I used to live in Flushing, and they used to go to Chinese school on one day a week, that the parents took them to, like a community center.
Yeah. Like I grew up in like a very white suburb, and those resources just weren't there for me. And I really envy people who, like my cousins and stuff, who grew up among like a large population of like Chinese American people, because their language ability is like so much better than mine. And I feel like quite quite at a loss, because like my Cantonese abilities are like not great. And so that really affects my relationship with my parents, because I can't really communicate with them that I would really like to. And that's really frustrating. And I've taken like courses and stuff, and I try to practice, but I can't have the conversations with them that I would really like to. Yeah.
I'll let you hop in, Vita, since I've been here all this time.
oh no, actually I've been listening for quite some time, but you made a point about the movie Dope that made me hate that movie even more than I already do. So in the movie, I don't even remember this, but the character was Nigerian.
I'm pretty sure he was, but they backgrounded. And when he gives his full name, it comes out, but they almost make it, and it's very implicit to me. They kind of make it as in that's one of the reasons why he's better. But
Better.
it's
Okay, and
yeah.
so that was my problem with the movie the entire time. This is before I knew this, or I even thought about the character being African. My problem with that movie is that they try to portray black, because Inglewood's a predominantly black community, predominantly black city. At least at one point it was. And I hate that they push this idea that in black communities we tear down the smart kids. If you go to any black school out here that I went to school at Inglewood and South Central, if you are a top student, nobody's telling you, oh, you can't get into Harvard. They do all they can to give you all the resources you can to get to college if they already think you're cream of the crop. It's the kids in between cream of the crop and the kids that they're trying to like bully the entire time that are always ignored. So when I saw that, it just really pissed me off because I think they showed like Black community as being this horrible ghetto place and where the teachers don't care and they try to tear down the smart kids when the smart kids are the ones that are always put on a pedestal in Black schools.
It's very subtle, right? But the character's name is Malcolm Adekanbi, and
See?
I didn't catch it really until he's giving the speech, and he says something like, people call me this, but my full name is that, and I felt like, okay, that's weird, and I realized, wait, that's an African name. It's very backgrounded, but the person who did the movie, on top of that, I believe, is African. Rick Famu Yiwa.
Now I'm even matter. Now
What's
I'm even
that?
matter. Now I'm even matter because that lets me know how he saw or how he sees Black communities. That's
Well,
what I see now.
well, yeah, that's what I mean. He's of Nigerian American descent, and that's crazy about him. He did The Wood, and I thought The Wood was actually pretty
I did
respectful to
too.
Black American culture.
But notice
So,
which Black people he covered though. So in The Wood, he's covering the middle class Black people. So that movie, La Tijera, was my school. Okay. So that was the middle school in that movie. My all my friends are in it, my cousins in it. My dad being hyper religious wouldn't let me be in it. But the thing about that movie is it focused entirely on the Black middle class. That
so
school, La
class.
Tijera, yeah, that school, La Tijera, is in Inglewood. It's in a predominantly middle class community. It's not too far from Ladera Heights, which is what they call the Black Beverly Hills, right? In fact, one of the schools is actually in Ladera Heights, even though Ladera Heights is LA and not Inglewood. That school is where I got, so when I was in elementary school and middle school, I went to school there. I had transferred there. I just went to live with my dad. We were really, really poor. I was one of the poorest kids in the school. And the middle school, the middle class Black kids, let's say middle class being Black for the middle class, like most of their parents were like, police officers or dentists and shit like that. And they were really like extremely bougie. So that portrayal of The Wood was accurate in regards to that particular area and those particular Black people. But again, that focus was on like, look at all the good Negroes, which is fine in the sense that it was a good movie and I was good to see that, see that on in movies. So I don't hate the movie at all, but it's still very indicative of who that person is that made that movie.
Yeah, something else that happens, and tell me if you see this, Amanda. I've seen it a lot. Is what happens is with a lot of Black immigrant kids, they are very have these weird shame issues about being Black immigrants a lot of times. But I'm from a different generation. I feel like now it's not so much. Like, for example, Haitian kids are cool now in the way that they weren't. They weren't when I was growing up. Like when I was growing up, they used to go into people's lunch bags to see if they had beef patties. And if you had a beef patty, they would fuck with you, right? But then reggae came, and then Jamaicans became cool, and then suddenly like Black Americans were coming with Rastafari medallions, and they started calling them Rasta imposters and Jafakins. Like people were pretending to be Jamaican. Like reggae and dancehall did a huge flip, but Haitians were still unpopular. And the thing that the Jamaicans and the Americans both agreed on was they didn't like the Haitians. Then when the Fugees happened, like the Haitians were cool, but like kids are kids, so everybody made fun of people for something. So
Yeah, it definitely wasn't cool to be Chinese when I was a kid. I don't know if it's like really cool to be Chinese now, but so another like stereotypical thing that like boba liberals will complain about is like kids making fun of their stinky lunches when they were kids.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot.
Yeah. And and you see a lot of like TikTok kids sort of complaining about how their food was made fun of when they were kids, and now white people like open these ethnic restaurants and make like millions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You like my culture now, but you didn't when I was a kid, and they're like bitter
Exactly.
about it.
Exactly. So like a lot of these critiques are just like more cultural than anything. So
But I feel like it's generational too, because for some reason, like the generation I was growing up, even though they gave us grief about it, and it made us want to assimilate even harder into like American culture, particularly Black American culture. We never sit around and talk about, like, there was, they say HBO, Haitian body odor, they would say Haitian booty scratchers and all this stuff, but we snapped back. Everybody snapped on each other. That's what kids did, you know. So I mean, because the Black American kids were snapping on each other with mama jokes and stuff, and then we learned mama jokes too, and it was like, and everybody grows up and it's that. But I feel like with millennials and Gen Z, it's somehow more acceptable. It's okay to be holding on to high school or childhood drama and use it as an excuse for like grown political discussions. Like people talking about reparations, and someone will be like, "You called me an African booty scratcher." It's like, we're talking about like actual real adult stuff. What are you talking about?
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a lot of the things that a lot of people on TikTok talk about. So I mean, I have a TikTok account, but I don't really post content. But I don't like following a lot of political people on TikTok, and maybe it's because a lot of them are like so young. They're like 17, 18, 19, that I feel like a lot of the discussions they bring up, people were talking about like years ago on Twitter, and that like sort of addressed it and we moved on. Within the Asian American community, like in general, it's a lot of talking about like cultural appropriation, or the way that
Wait, I think you're breaking up, at least for me.
is this better?
I mean, you sound okay now.
Okay.
Okay. Cool.
I'm good. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like a lot of like talk about like, it's like cultural critique or like cultural appropriation, or
Chaotic Good makes a good point. A lot of people are grown children, but some people are actually kids, and that's true. When you're an actual kid, I cut you a lot of slack. But when you're 20 something and 30 something, still complaining about this stuff. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, it's like it's not ever really a critique of like capitalism or like U.S. imperialism, but more just like cultural stuff. But maybe it's because like the kids, they're like so young on TikTok.
I think what a lot of these people do when they really look up to how white parents treat their kids and stuff is they decontextualize it, right? And if you look at white history or read people's coming of age stories, especially in their so-called old countries and stuff like that. Like, for example, I'm watching this show. It's a pretty good show. It's called My Brilliant Friend. And it's weird that it's about Italians, but I feel there's certain times where I'll watch something Italian and I'll feel a empathy for it. And I'll give you an example. There's a Sopranos episode where they're going to the so-called old country, the Sopranos characters, and they go to Italy, and they're really excited, and they define themselves in America as, you know, being Goombas, being you know, paisanos, whatever. They're proud to be Italian, and then they go there and they don't fit in at all. They stick out like sore thumbs. They're just viewed as like crass Americans, and they're really American. They're not really Italian. They're more American. And a lot of people have a similar story. Like, you know, I remember when I first went to Haiti, I was like, holy crap, I'm just American. I have, you know, and they treat me like I'm American. Like I stick out like a sore thumb. And, you know, this thing is very similar. My Brilliant Friend, which is like, it reminds me of stories like, you know, my parents told about being in a poor village, because these are poor Italians, the kind of people that were dying to get into America if they could. You know, they're poor, whatever. And you look at how they live, and it's all the stuff that these immigrant kids talk about. Parents beating them all the time, putting pressure on them and stuff. And it's like a lot of the stuff is poverty. A lot of the stuff is being on the bottom of wherever you are. Yeah, a lot of them is being on the bottom wherever you are and everything. But if you look at how white people in the West are able to live now, they're able to live that way because it's off the blood of poor people.
Right.
Like they get to colonize people. They get to put other people on the bottom. They get to raise a whole standard of life just for European countries in general. And, you know, they get to go to different continents and colonize them. They get to come to America, wipe out indigenous people. And what people don't realize, this is a very recent development for white people. Like, you know, they used to beat the kids in school. You know, they used to do all types of stuff.
Yeah, and I
think
mean,
this is what white people are essentially, and it's not. It's just a recent thing.
Yeah, and I think like these like stereotypes of like non-white people like beating their kids and like being abusive toward their families. Those types of stories have the currency that they do because they serve like a certain like function, right? They serve to stereotype non-white people and like serve to dehumanize people and kind of hold them up as other, like a culture that's like sort of backwards, but juxtaposed against civilized white culture, civilized white families that, you know, are affectionate and know like how to show affection and are encouraging and loving, compared to like these abusive non-white families.
Yeah,
but that.
I want to say real quick, I used to teach a preschool in Nanny in Redondo Beach, which is one of the wealthiest communities in LA County, right? And that community is predominantly white and Asian. And the school that I was teaching at, it was a very specialized school. So majority of the kids there were white, a few Asian, and it was very specific in how you talked to and treated the kids. And what was interesting to me was that a lot of the Asian parents would talk to me. Well, I'll say Asian Americans. I believe a couple of them were Asian immigrants, but most of them were Asian American. And I would talk to them, and they would talk about how they were raised and how what their experiences were, versus now they're able to put their kids in schools where they're not treated that way. Because you go to low income schools, they don't treat them with respect at all, right? You talk to like you're an animal all day. Whereas when I taught there, it was very like you get down to eye level, you talk to everybody face to face, you teach them, you never tell a child no or don't, you show them what to do, that kind of thing. And it was very different. A lot of the Asian American parents were just like this, that they were so grateful to have found that space, but that was so much more income based than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, and I won't deny that my parents were like very strict with me growing up, but you know, it's like there are a lot of complexities with that. You know, they were very strict because we didn't have a lot of money at all, and my parents like lived very precarious lives when they were in China. And so like the way that they showed love with me was to be very strict because they wanted me to succeed and they wanted me to, you know, they didn't want me to grow up in the kind of poverty that they grew up in. So
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
To what degree do you feel your parents assimilated? Because, for example, my parents, my mother super assimilated. Like big time. My mother was super assimilated. My father basically never left Haiti in his head. Like he got to work in a workplace where everybody was Haitian. He followed Haitian politics, read Haitian news. They were polar opposites. And I feel like if both my parents were like my father, it would have turned out like way different. And I feel like that's something that goes. I mean, like my father had the option to never leave Haiti because he could form a whole community in New York of Haitian friends, Haitian family, a Haitian workplace. You know, which my mother didn't work in a place like that. She had diverse friends. She had Black American friends. She had Jamaican friends, white friends, whatever. So I was wondering, like, how similar your parents were, and if you think that made a difference.
They're not very assimilated at all, and yeah, that probably made a difference. My mom, both of my parents, when they came here, they spoke like very little English, and they worked in a restaurant when I was really young. And like my mom, she would take English classes after she got off of work. And so her English like slowly began to develop. And so she would wait tables. And then my dad, who never really picked up English that well and never took English courses, he worked in the back of the house in the kitchen. And, you know, my dad continued restaurant work. And then my mom, when I was like 13, she got a job at this like plant, this factory. And so she was among like a lot of other English speakers, like more so. And so her English has gotten better. So I guess like I would say she's like a little bit more assimilated than my dad. But I wouldn't say like she's very assimilated at all. Like she has like American friends, like, and she hangs out with her coworkers. But she like primarily hangs out with her Chinese friends. Like before this whole thing happened, she would like every Saturday she would like play mahjong with her friends. Whereas my dad, he doesn't have any American friends. All his friends are Chinese. He speaks very little English.
Somebody said this. Maybe this is true. I think it is harder for outgroup men to. I mean, there's a whole series of studies about this. It's called social dominance theory. But yeah, they're claiming it's a bit harder for immigrant men to assimilate. Maybe that explains the difference.
Yeah,
maybe. My father actually spoke great English. He just chose to, if he could, not use it. But it was even weirder because he actually spoke great English. He just
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like my mom, she would stay here forever, and they probably will. But my dad, if you gave him the option to return to China, he would take it. But I think he doesn't want to because I live here, and like my mom doesn't want to go back.
Hey, Vita, do you want to weigh in on anything? Because I have to leave soon.
Oh, you have to go too?
Yeah, because we have book club tonight. For people who are members of the Champagne Sharks patrons, we have book club tonight, and we're reading a bunch of essays. We're reading Adolf Reed. We're reading Harry Frankfurt and something else. So yeah,
that's some nerds, man. That's the nerdiest people ever.
Oh hell yeah, basically.
I'm just kidding. It's great too.
Yeah, no, I own it. It's all good.
If I take my Ritalin, I'll be able to do it.
Yeah. So since Vita showed up, I want to see if she has anything to say. Then want to give Amanda the last word. I know you have to leave yourself, Amanda.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add to Ad's conversation. It was really dope listening to you guys, though. I mean, I'm African American. Both my parents are American. Only experience and the community I grew up in, most of the Black people weren't immigrants.
Yeah.
So, because in LA, it's not like New York, for example. And we're also extremely segregated. Only Black people that were from other countries here were maybe Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Belizean. Because I grew up in a Central American neighborhood too. But even then, like Afro-Latinos in particular either chose to be Latino or chose to be Black, depending on how much they could pass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So So it was just because I grew up in a Black and Latino community. There was no white people there, so I didn't know any white people.
I'm always envious of people like that. I always think of like what kind of person I could have been if I grew up like among like Chinese people or even like non-white people in general. You know,
I will say this: I'm extremely grateful once I started to meet Black people who didn't have that opportunity, and I saw how different their politics were. Like for them, their politics was so rooted in like racism being blatant as opposed to structural racism. So I grew up learning about structural racism. I grew up learning about why does South Central look this way, but West LA doesn't. And we would literally go on, we had what's called a reality tour. We would go into our neighborhoods, count how many liquor stores we had, how many motels were in our neighborhood, how many grocery stores were in our neighborhood versus liquor stores. Then go to the other neighborhoods and count how many they have, right? How many sit-down restaurants versus how many sit-down restaurants we had. So I always been taught the structural part of racism understanding because I didn't know any white people to know blatant racism like that. When I got to college, was the first time I experienced really blatant racism on a daily basis. And it was such a culture shock. I don't see how you could be a non-white person and live and be in a predominantly white space and grow up that way. Like that seems like torture because I can see why if you grew up that way, you would want to assimilate because it feels like it's your safest option.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're all day just getting hurled with racist bullets all day.
Yeah. And like, yeah, there is a desire to assimilate, but then you grow up with like this sort of complex that we were talking about earlier of never feeling like you quite fit in one way or the other, like never fully white, never fully Chinese. So I get where like a lot of these like Asian Americans are coming from. Yeah, and I grew up with the exact opposite experience as you. Like all I knew of until I was 18 and moved away was that sort of like very blatant, overt racism. And I would see it directed at me when I went to school, and I would see it directed at my parents when we would go out. They would get called names, or we would like go out to eat, and like, you know, white families would just turn to look at us and like stare at us and made us feel like we were aliens. So it was like that very direct, uncomfortable type of racism. But then I moved to Kentucky, to Louisville, when I was 19, which is a very liberal city. And because I was so used to that type of like very direct sort of racism, it was like very much a relief to like sort of like see these people and be around these people who like kind of openly celebrated diversity, or like celebrated diversity in like these like kind of like ridiculous, like silly ways, like appreciating like ethnic food or whatever, stuff like that.
It sounds like LA.
Yeah. But it took me like several years to sort of figure out like that more subtle type of like white liberal racism that's like sort of simmering.
The microaggression.
Microaggressions, yeah. And then you know, maybe like even longer after that to really understand racism at a structural level.
I was reading a study on second-gen immigrants and stuff, and it said second-gen Americans, because they're not actually immigrants. I shouldn't say that. Second-gen Americans, and what it was saying about them was interesting. It says that there's a certain age, especially as they get closer to middle age, that they like when they're younger, a lot of the focus is on assimilating, and people always think of assimilating as being what you do to whiteness, but with Black immigrants, there's like actually two choices of assimilation. Are you going to assimilate to Black Americanness, or are you going to assimilate to white Americanness? And I feel like for Asians, there's not really an Asian American identity really yet to assimilate into. Assimilation is just thought of as assimilating into whiteness. So there's kind of a double choice of assimilation for, I think, Black immigrants, but it's also not always a choice. Sometimes, you know, if all year round is just Americans, that's what you if you don't have any rooting in your home culture, you know, you don't have the choice to not assimilate if you're born here and whatever. Like, for example, my parents deliberately didn't speak Creole to me growing up. I had to pick it up through like osmosis because they wanted me to um, fit into America. So they didn't do that speak Creole at home thing at all. That's all they spoke to me was English. Um, but the study said that a lot of immigrants, no matter what the origin is, they have this assimilation anxiety when they're younger, but then as they get older, they start being more proud of their, you know, home culture or whatever, or getting curious about it, or starting to see the differences between themselves and, you know, the new culture, and actually starting to see ways in which they think, oh, actually, my culture is actually superior to American culture in a lot of these ways. You know, didn't really see it when I was younger, and I'm convinced that's what happened to the creator of Dope, because he's like in his 30s or older, in his 40s when he did Dope, and he's younger in the wood. I feel like something kind of happened because the attitude to Americanness is very different in Dope. I felt than the wood. I don't know what it is, but if you watch it again,
the wood was the respectable Negroes. That's why I'm trying to
yeah,
tell you.
yeah, and they did. The character is explicitly Nigerian, and they throw a little shade. Everything that's stereotypical in that movie is Black Americans and their lower class. Even the Black Americans that are upper class, they're trying to emulate the lower class, and that's why they're embarrassments. You know, I find it pretty interesting. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm glad you joined in, the Vita. I wanted you to meet Amanda. I didn't think you'd be able to come because of the time, so that's a pleasant surprise. Amanda, any final things? We only got through a third of your stuff. You gave a lot of links. You're always welcome.
I went through 2 of my links that I sent. Like, I didn't spend so much time on these links, but no, I don't really have any closing thoughts. This was really fun. It was a good discussion.
Check her out at Cat Content Only. You're free to always come back, and we'll. You know what? I think this one was just too interesting. I think that's the problem. The think tank stuff you can go through, pow, but this stuff a lot of people have it.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack for sure.
Yeah. I think once we got on this, it was over. Yeah. Yeah. So everybody, thanks. If you want to hit us at Venmo or Cash App at Champagne Sharks, feel free to do so. PayPal at champagnesharks@gmail.com, or hit the super chat on your way out. But yeah, we appreciate all of y'all. We appreciate Amanda for coming on. And if you want to just be kept abreast of how crazy and bigoted the media is in this Chinese coverage, both domestically and abroad, definitely on Twitter, Cat Content Only, and there's no cat content on it, so just be ready.
There's very little cat content.
Yeah. All right, be good, guys. Take care.
Bye.